Scarborough Shoal?
Scarborough Shoal.
There's been a lot of activity on the high seas of Southeast Asia, with the Philippines and China moving around an area known as the Scarborough Shoal.
These activities were again revived. BK 1991.
And screening for the landing force.
The prospect of Scarborough Shoal becoming a permanent Chinese military base would mark one of the most consequential strategic ruptures in the South China Sea since China's island-building surge of the mid-2010s. What was once a quiet fishing ground, known as Huangyuan Dao in China and Bajo de Masinloc in the Philippines, has evolved into a geopolitical fulcrum where sovereignty, alliance credibility, and international law collide. Since China seized de facto control of the shoal in 2012 after a standoff with the Philippines, Scarborough has become a symbol not merely of territorial dispute, but of whether legal rulings in smaller states still matter in an era of great power competition. Unlike China's earlier militarization of the Spratly Islands or the Paracel Islands, Scarborough represents a different order of escalation. It is closer to a treaty ally's mainland, embedded in vital sea lines of communication, and subject to a clear international legal ruling. A base here would not be incremental, it would be transformational. Just as Russia's seizure and militarization of Crimea reshaped the Black Sea balance, or China's pressure around Taiwan has redrawn assumptions in the Western Pacific, Scarborough would redraw the strategic map of Southeast Asia almost overnight.
On whether there can be joint development with China on our exclusive economic zone, my opinion is it's not possible because under the Constitution, there's a provision there which says that the use and enjoyment of the exclusive economic zone shall be reserved exclusively to Filipinos.
The legal stakes are unusually stark. An international arbitral tribunal ruled in 2016 that Scarborough Shoal lies within the Philippine exclusive economic zone, and that China's 9-dash line has no legal basis. If Beijing were to militarize the feature anyway, it would signal that binding legal judgments can be ignored when power allows, setting a precedent with implications far beyond Asia, from the Arctic to the Eastern Mediterranean. The question then becomes unavoidable. If international law fails at Scarborough, where does it still hold? Strategically, a base on Scarborough would close a critical gap in China's South China Sea posture, enabling near-continuous surveillance, missile coverage, and pressure across the region. It would place northern Luzon within direct military reach, compress warning times for Philippine and U.S. forces, and complicate freedom of navigation operations. For Washington, it would test alliance commitments in a way no artificial island ever has, bringing the Mutual Defense Treaty from legal abstraction into potential operational reality. For the Philippines, the implications would be existential rather than theoretical. Loss of fishing access, heightened vulnerability of key bases, domestic political pressure to respond, and the risk of being strategically encircled. For ASEAN, it would expose the limits of consensus and centrality. For U.S. allies such as Japan and Australia, it would reinforce the logic of tighter security alignment. And for the global system, it would accelerate a trend already visible, from Ukraine to the Red Sea, where power increasingly overrides rules. This leads to the core question that defines the entire debate. What would actually change, strategically, legally, and politically, if China built a military base on Scarborough Shoal? The answer is sobering. It would tilt the regional balance of power, escalate tensions with Manila and Washington, hollow out the credibility of international maritime law, and harden the Indo-Pacific into a more polarized and militarized security environment.
In that sense, Scarborough Shoal is not just another disputed feature, it is a stress test for the future of maritime order itself. Geography explains much of Scarborough Shoal's significance. The reef lies roughly 220 kilometers west of Luzon, placing it well within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. It also sits near major sea lines of communication that carry trillions of dollars in global trade annually through the South China Sea. While the shoal itself is small, its location magnifies its strategic weight far beyond its physical footprint. From a military perspective, Scarborough Shoal occupies a crossroads between the South China Sea and the Philippine Sea. A militarized presence would allow China to monitor air and naval traffic entering and exiting the Luzon Strait, extend radar and missile coverage toward northern Philippines and potentially southern Japan, and close what many defense planners see as a strategic gap between Chinese positions in the Paracels to the north and the Spratlys to the south. One senior U.S. defense official famously described Scarborough as the missing piece in China's South China Sea chessboard, a phrase that captures its connective role in Beijing's broader maritime strategy. Economically and environmentally, the shoal also matters deeply to the Philippines. For generations, it has served as a traditional fishing ground for thousands of Filipino fishermen. The surrounding waters are believed to hold potential hydrocarbon resources linked to the broader Luzon basin. Ecologically, Scarborough is a sensitive coral reef system that has already suffered degradation from overfishing and episodic dredging. Militarization would likely accelerate environmental damage, compounding economic losses with ecological harm. Symbolically, Scarborough Shoal has become a litmus test. It tests Philippine sovereignty, ASEAN's credibility as a regional organization, and the enforceability of international law. What happens there signals whether small and middle powers can rely on legal norms or whether raw power will ultimately prevail.
I continue to find ways to redefine our relationship with China. And I really believe that the way forward is to change. Because when you talk about China and the Philippines, all you talk about are the territorial disputes.
The legal framework governing Scarborough Shoal is unusually clear by the standards of the South China Sea. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states possess sovereign rights over resources within their exclusive economic zones, while low-tide elevations like Scarborough cannot generate territorial seas or EEZs of their own. This framework was reinforced decisively in 2016, when an arbitral tribunal constituted under UNCLOS ruled in favor of the Philippines in its case against China.
To understand why Beijing might consider such a move, one must view Scarborough Shoal within China's broader strategic vision. A base there would consolidate the 9-dash line by completing a strategic triangle linking the Paracel Islands in the north, the Spratly Islands in the south, and Scarborough Shoal to the east. This would allow China to exert near-continuous surveillance and pressure across the South China Sea. From a military standpoint, Scarborough would be ideal for expanding China's anti-access, area denial posture. Potential deployments could include long-range surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, advanced radar systems, and electronic warfare capabilities. Such assets would complicate U.S. and allied operations, raise the costs of freedom of navigation missions, and compress response times in any crisis. Scarborough would also strengthen China's gray zone coercion toolkit. By backing Coast Guard and maritime militia operations with hardened military infrastructure,
Beijing could apply sustained pressure on the Philippines while staying below the threshold of open conflict. Domestic politics further reinforce this logic. Nationalist narratives around sovereignty play well at home, particularly during periods of economic or political strain, providing incentives for assertive actions abroad. At the strategic level, Chinese defense white papers emphasize dominance of the near seas and the reduction of U.S. military influence in East Asia. Scarborough Shoal fits squarely into that long-term vision.
A military base on Scarborough Shoal would have immediate and far-reaching military consequences. Infrastructure could include runways capable of hosting fighter aircraft, intelligence and surveillance installations, missile batteries, hardened shelters, and naval resupply facilities. Even a modest footprint would significantly alter the regional military balance. For the Philippines, the implications would be severe. Luzon's western coast would fall within direct missile range, reducing warning time and increasing vulnerability. Key installations, including Philippine Air Force bases, would face heightened risk. The psychological effect would be just as important as the physical one, reinforcing perceptions of encirclement and strategic disadvantage. For the United States, Scarborough would complicate operational planning under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Forces rotating through EDCA sites would operate under greater risk. Freedom of navigation operations would become more complex, and higher levels of readiness and dispersion would be required. A former U.S. Indo-Pacific commander summed it up bluntly. Scarborough Shoal would be a game changer, militarily, politically, and psychologically. Dense deployments also raise escalation risks. Accidents, miscalculations, or misinterpreted signals could rapidly spiral from gray zone confrontation into kinetic conflict, especially given alliance commitments and compressed decision-making timelines. For Manila, militarization would be a national security shock. It would mean the effective loss of access to traditional fishing grounds, strategic pressure on Luzon, and a reduction in deterrence credibility. Domestic politics would be equally affected, with pressure on leaders to respond decisively and a surge in nationalist sentiment that could polarize society. Alliance dynamics would come to the fore. Militarization could force clearer interpretations or even activation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. In 2023, Washington reaffirmed that any armed attack on Philippine forces in the South China Sea would invoke the treaty, making Scarborough a direct test of alliance credibility. Economic costs would also mount. Fishing livelihoods would decline, investor confidence could weaken, and insurance costs for shipping might rise, affecting broader economic stability. Across Southeast Asia, a Chinese decision to construct a permanent military base on Scarborough Shoal would trigger widespread unease, but not a unified response. Within ASEAN, reactions would be shaped by geography, threat perception, and economic exposure to China. Claimant states such as Vietnam and Malaysia would be deeply alarmed, viewing militarization as confirmation that Beijing is willing to convert de facto control into permanent military dominance, despite international legal rulings. For Hanoi in particular, Scarborough would reinforce fears that China's island militarization is not limited to isolated features, but part of a methodical campaign to lock in control across the entire South China Sea. By contrast, non-claimant ASEAN members would face a more complex dilemma.
While states such as Indonesia, Thailand, and Cambodia share concerns about regional instability and freedom of navigation, many would hesitate to take an overtly confrontational stance. China's role as a top trading partner, investor, and source of infrastructure financing exerts powerful gravitational pull, encouraging diplomatic caution. The likely outcome would be familiar: carefully worded statements calling for restraint and dialogue, coupled with an unwillingness to endorse collective countermeasures. This divergence would further erode ASEAN consensus and weaken its claim to centrality in regional security affairs, reinforcing perceptions that the organization struggles to manage great power rivalry within its own maritime neighborhood. For the United States, a militarized Scarborough Shoal would represent a direct strategic and alliance challenge. Washington would almost certainly respond with strong diplomatic condemnation, framing the move as a violation of international law and a threat to regional stability. More importantly, it would accelerate practical military adjustments, expanded rotational deployments, increased maritime and air patrols, and deeper defense cooperation with the Philippines under existing alliance frameworks. Scarborough's proximity to Luzon would make it impossible for U.S. planners to treat the issue as abstract or peripheral. Instead, it would become a core contingency shaping force posture, operational planning, and alliance signaling. U.S. treaty allies in the Indo-Pacific would respond by tightening security coordination. Japan, already acutely sensitive to Chinese pressure in the East China Sea and around Taiwan, would likely view Scarborough as another data point confirming the need for stronger deterrence and deeper integration with U.S. and Philippine forces. Australia would similarly interpret militarization as justification for expanded joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and maritime cooperation across Southeast Asia. South Korea, while more cautious due to its proximity to North Korea, would face growing pressure to align more closely with US-led regional security efforts as Indo-Pacific dynamics become increasingly interconnected. Beyond the region, European actors would also become more visible. France, the United Kingdom, and Germany have all framed freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific as a matter of global interest rather than regional politics. A Chinese base at Scarborough would likely prompt these countries to expand naval deployments, participate more actively in multilateral exercises, and raise the issue in international forums. While European involvement would not alter the military balance directly, it would internationalize the dispute further, reinforcing the narrative that Scarborough is not just a bilateral or regional issue, but a test case for global maritime norms. The cumulative effect of these reactions would be strategic polarization. Rather than restoring stability, militarization would harden divisions, accelerate bloc formation, and reduce diplomatic maneuvering space. On one side would be an increasingly networked group of U.S. allies and partners, emphasizing deterrence, interoperability, and presence. On the other, China would double down on its narrative of resisting external interference, while consolidating its position on the ground, or rather, at sea. In this environment, Scarborough Shoal would cease to be a localized dispute and instead function as a catalyst, accelerating the transformation of the Indo-Pacific from a contested region into a structurally divided security system. Perhaps the most far-reaching consequences would be normative. Ignoring a binding arbitral ruling would undermine UNCLOS, weaken peaceful dispute resolution, and normalize militarization of disputed features. Other states might feel compelled to fortify their own claims, triggering an arms race. Freedom of navigation would face new risks, with the possibility of coercive inspections or exclusion zones. Globally, failure to respond effectively would signal that power, not law, determines outcomes, eroding confidence in international governance well beyond Southeast Asia. In the short term, militarization would trigger diplomatic protests and military signaling. Over the medium term, arms buildups and gray zone confrontations would become more frequent. In the worst case, armed clashes could draw in U.S. forces under alliance commitments, with rapid escalation driven by limited communication channels and ambiguous red lines. Crisis management would be especially challenging. Decision makers would face compressed timelines, incomplete information, and intense domestic pressure, increasing the risk of miscalculation. For the Philippines, priorities would include legal and diplomatic coalition building, defense modernization, and expanded cooperation with allies and partners. For the United States, clear deterrence signaling, treaty clarification, and sustained presence without provocation would be essential. Risk reduction measures such as crisis hotlines, confidence-building mechanisms, and agreed rules of engagement would be vital to prevent escalation. Scarborough Shoal is more than a reef. It is a test of international law, alliance credibility, and regional peace. Militarization would mark a strategic inflection point, accelerating militarization and polarization across the Indo-Pacific. Ultimately, the question is not only what China might build, but what the world is prepared to defend. How Scarborough Shoal is handled will shape the future of maritime governance and great power relations for decades to come.
If you liked the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.